Hello, this is a video of me making an LED flashing dice. So the idea behind it is when you push the button, the lights flash till it comes up with like a dice number, which is why there's 7 LEDs on it. It's something that I got in kit form. As you can clearly see, I'm having to solder it all together. And I've got this basically for soldering practice, and I was kind of inspired by the videos at bigclive.com or possibly AVE do. I've watched quite a lot of videos of people making things or taking things apart, and I thought to myself, well, I'd quite like to learn to solder, and I'd quite like to learn to video edit. So that's basically why I've been doing these. And I have to say, my soldering was improving towards the end of doing these. At the beginning there were one or two that weren't soldered, one or two pins that weren't soldered all that successfully. Whereas towards the end I was starting to get the hang of it. And you'll probably find that when I do a kit again, I think I've got one more left that I want to build in a couple of, I'd probably do it in a month or two, and you'll probably find I'm back to the beginning, and it's like, yeah. But it's one of these things, it's a skill, you've got to try it, got to keep having a go, and eventually you'll get the hang of it. Bit like video editing, it's a skill, and some people have got it, other people haven't yet, and I'm starting to get the hang of it. I've been using a program called Hit Film Express, which is free to download, and having downloaded it, you then drag clips in, and it means that you can chop clips up into little bits, and it does have fancy fades and things like that, but so far I've not tried anything more fancy than the basics, because that seemed to work with this sort of video. And as you watch a lot of YouTube, you'll find that a lot of it is jump cut. So we'll do a bit and we'll jump cut to the next bit that looks good, taking out the sections that weren't quite right. So as you look through this, you'll find that where I've lifted the circuit board up so that I can look at it more easily without having a camera between me and it, which, having a camera between you and it does rather slow the process down quite a bit. I've cut those bits out because no one wants to have a video where it basically looks like a still image. But all the components on this went together very easily. It was a off-the-shelf kit. It was delivered from China, ready to assemble. There's no instructions with it at all, but all of the components are marked on the circuit board, so it's just a question of poking the components through the holes in the circuit board and soldering them on. The power supply for it is a fairly standard 4.5 5-volt supply, which means that if you cut the end off an old USB lead, and most people probably got a few of them lying around, you can just use a standard USB power supply to power these sorts of things. And more or less all electronics seems to be heading in that direction, that you can just power it off USB, because virtually everyone's got USB chargers, whereas it used to be everything had its own different power supply, and you had to find the right power supply for it, and they were all different voltages, they're all different current ratings, but yeah, people have sort of standardized on the 5-volt USB power supply, which is really nice. And it also means that you can just plug it into something like a USB power bank if you're out and about and want to use these sorts of things. Save trying to work out how you're going to plug it in, or trying to find the right batteries, or USB power banks are starting to get a lot more ubiquitous than they used to be. And yeah, I don't know if you can, don't know how easily people will be able to see how bad my soldering is. It was definitely improving towards the end. Every so often you'll see a white pen come into shot, and the white pen is again from China, delivered, is a flux pen, and the solder has flux in it, which helps the solder run around the components. So as you heat it, you'll see the little wisps of what looks like smoke coming off as you heat the ends, and that's flux. Yeah, you'll see the little wisps of smoke come off, and that's the flux burning off as it gets heated. But the flux really helps the solder flow round the joints, so that it actually flows into the joint, and you don't end up with just a blob of solder on it that's not actually electrically connecting the components to each other. So the solder, when they make it, does actually have flux effectively down a little core in the middle of it. So to help it, and like I said, that's the little wisps of smoke coming off. But all in all, it's fairly straightforward. I'm not entirely sure that this was working completely properly, because it seemed to quite like going for 2 once I'd fired it up, but these things happen. I wasn't too worried. It's effectively done what I was aiming for, which was basically I wanted to give it a bit of wanted to give myself some soldering practice. And you'll see as I'm putting on components here that I'll solder, on most of them I'm doing one lead one side, and then either wait a moment before doing the lead the other side, or I'll carry on to the next component, so that you're not doing all the leads on the same component at the same time as each other, which helps, because the components, if they get too hot, can have issues. And of course, if you throw flowing solder onto the component leads, the solder has to be heated to a couple of 100 degrees C for it to flow properly. And again, the little snips that I'm using to cut off the ends of the leads are ones that have come from China. They're generic snips, and they do make bigger ones, they do make smaller ones, but it's, yeah, all of the components have got much cheaper than they used to be. Although, having said that, you used to be able to go into shops on the high street and buy electronic components, and you can't do that anymore, because all of the shops that sell those sorts of things have closed down. But on the other hand, because of the internet, and because everything's quite easy to post from China, it's possible to get components much more cheaply, and it's possible to get little kits like that much more cheaply.